What do the biblical apocalypse, the modern obsession with data and statistics, and a magical chalice have in common?
I mean, honestly, it sounds like the setup to a really weird esoteric joke.
It totally does. But it actually forms the foundation of, well, one of the absolute most complex philosophical frameworks we have ever examined.
Oh, without a doubt.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a really dense lecture from the year 1924. This is pulled directly from the Rudolf Steiner archive.
Right. The text is titled Lecture 8, Lectures to Priests, the Apocalypse. He delivered it in Dornach, Switzerland.
And it is a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. Steiner was speaking directly to this group of priests, and he's laying out what essentially amounts to a cosmic battle plan.
Yeah.
He presents this entire universe where human intelligence isn't just, a biological byproduct of evolution. It is a literal battleground. Like, cosmic entities are actively competing for the future of humanity right inside our minds.
And so our mission today is to unpack that incredibly unique worldview for you. We want to extract the core philosophical arguments from this text and really explore how a lecture from a century ago addresses the very nature of human intellect.
And human individuality, really.
Exactly. But before we get into the actual mechanics of this cosmic battle, I need to provide a very clear impartiality disclaimer.
Yes, very important context here.
Because throughout this text, Steiner expresses some highly critical views of certain political and social movements of his era.
He specifically targets Bolshevism, social democracy, and Western scientific methods.
Especially the use of statistics, which is fascinating. But we want to be crystal clear with you, our listener, that we are not taking a side on these issues.
Not at all.
We are neither endorsing nor condemning Steiner's political or scientific critiques. Our role here is strictly to impart his ideas exactly as they are presented in the original 1924 source material. We're just analyzing the architecture of his argument.
Right. We are looking at this purely as intellectual historians.
Yeah.
The goal is just to understand his epistemological framework. We want to see how he connected these vast spiritual realms to the very grounded geopolitical realities of the 1920s.
Regardless of where those ideas sit on our modern political spectrum.
Exactly.
So, to you, the listener, I invite you to settle in. Think of yourself as the third person sitting right here at the table with us as we navigate this text, because we have a massive amount of ground to cover.
We really do.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we need to start with the era we supposedly live in, according to Steiner.
The consciousness soul age.
Right. Steiner claims humanity is currently navigating this consciousness soul age. And to even understand the weight of what that means, we have to look at how human beings previously conceptualized intelligence.
Like back in the Middle Ages, for example.
Yeah, exactly. During that period, intelligence wasn't viewed as something originating from within the human skull.
No, it was entirely externalized.
Right. People look up at the night sky and they understood intellect as a celestial force. It was something literally belonging to angelic beings, and it was just kind of bestowed downward onto us.
But in this new consciousness soul age, humanity is taking intellectuality into its own hands.
Yeah.
We are integrating it directly into our individuality.
And that shift from a celestial, gifted intelligence to an internalized independent intellect, that sets the stage for the entire crisis Steiner outlines, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Because this is a highly vulnerable transition period. Humanity is gaining independent intellect, which Steiner actually views as a necessary evolutionary step.
It's not a bad thing.
Apparently.
Right. We're supposed to be doing this.
Yes. However, it is currently restricted entirely to our conscious reflections. It's just in our minds. It hasn't permeated the deepest forces of our soul yet.
So our core passions, or deeper emotional resonances, they remain somewhat separate from this new cold intellect.
Exactly. I like to think of it like we have essentially booted up this massive new operating system for our minds, but our spiritual hardware hasn't fully integrated it yet.
That's a great way to put it.
And because this intellect is just kind of floating freely, untethered to our deepest spiritual essence, it becomes the ideal target for a cosmic hijacking.
A cosmic heist. Which brings us to the villain of the piece. Who exactly is orchestrating this hijacking?
Well, Steiner introduces a very specific antagonist.
And he is very careful to distinguish this entity from the cartoonish, pitchfork-wielding devil of popular folklore.
Oh, yeah. He is not talking about the guy in the red suit. He refers to an Ahrimanic power called Satan.
And for those unfamiliar with the terminology, Ahrimanic draws from ancient Zoroastrian concepts. It represents forces that are cold, materialistic, and deeply destructive to spiritual light.
And Steiner assigns this entity an incredibly high cosmic rank. He calls him a principality, or an archai.
An archai. What does that mean in this context?
So an archai is a spirit of personality. In the esoteric hierarchy of angels, this is a being that operates on the level of entire historical epochs.
Okay, so this is not a minor demon.
Not at all. This means Satan is a heavyweight cosmic entity, and he took hold of intellectuality long, long before humans even possessed it. He commands a terrifyingly vast, cold intellect.
And his crime, the heist he is attempting to pull off, is binding the newly independent human intellect to his own.
He wants to chain human thought to his massive, purely materialistic intellectuality.
But to what end? Like, what is the ultimate goal of this binding?
To derail divine human evolution entirely. Steiner argues that this Ahrimanic power is attempting to nullify the mystery of Golgotha.
The mystery of Golgotha. So in Steiner's cosmology, that refers to the spiritual activity and the sacrifice of Christ, right?
Yes, which acts as the central anchor for human spiritual evolution in his framework.
So if this cosmic entity can sever our intellect from that specific evolutionary path, humanity basically falls away from its intended cosmic destiny.
And gets dragged into an entirely different, much darker planetary evolution.
It's terrifying when you lay it out like that, but I think the brilliance of this vulnerability lies in why the intellect is targeted over anything else.
Yeah, that's a crucial point.
Like, why not corrupt our desires or physical bodies?
Well, Steiner's argument is that the human intellect is the most independent aspect of our being right now.
Because our feelings, our deep-seated desires, our sensations, those are still firmly tethered to higher, superhuman divine powers.
Exactly. They have built-in spiritual defenses. If a dark entity tried to manipulate my raw feelings directly, it would have to contend with the divine forces that already reside there.
But the intellect is free.
It's completely free. It is the one tool humans must use completely of their own volition to connect with their divine origins.
And its freedom is its exact weakness.
Yes. It is unshielded, which makes the single thread this entity can pull to unravel the entire human tapestry.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because Steiner does not leave this battle in the abstract, spiritual realms. He observes this cosmic heist manifesting directly in the tangible political and scientific movements of 1924.
He was looking right out his window and seeing it happen.
Satan's primary method on Earth, according to Steiner, is the destruction of human individuality by forcing people into what he terms group souls.
And massive associations. We see his geopolitical commentary emerge really sharply here.
Yeah, he points to Eastern Europe.
Specifically the rise of Bolshevism. He views this as a movement acting in a terribly satanic way.
And again, keeping our neutral stance here, his reasoning within the text is that forcibly grouping people together, stripping away their individual intellectual freedom to serve a collective mass that artificially creates these highly vulnerable group souls.
He even traces the intellectual lineage of this Eastern movement back to Central Europe. He specifically names philosophers like Richard Avenarius and Ernst Mach.
Both of whom were heavy proponents of empirio-criticism.
Right, which effectively reduces human experience to pure sensory data.
It strips away any metaphysical interpretation whatsoever.
Exactly the kind of thinking that completely removes the spiritual individual from the equation. And Steiner notes that those philosophies were heavily studied by the intellectual architects of the Russian Revolution.
So they basically planted the seeds for the mass collectivism Steiner was observing in 1924.
Yes. But Steiner's critique definitely doesn't stop at the borders of Eastern Europe.
No, it does not. He directs an equally harsh, if not sharper, criticism at the West. He argues that Western science is actively performing this satanic work through what he calls the emancipated intellect.
The emancipated intellect.
Yeah. What does that earthly manifestation actually look like in the West?
It looks like experimental psychology and statistics.
Which is wild to hear today.
It really is. The emancipated intellect is the human mind completely disconnected from the human soul. And Steiner provides a highly specific example here by calling out William James,
the American psychologist.
Right. He points to researchers in the United States who are studying inner religious conversions. Those profound moments of spiritual awakening that frequently occur around the age of 20.
Yeah, James and his contemporaries were studying these events using statistical percentages.
They were tracking how many people had these awakenings, compiling the data, and literally turning profound spiritual metamorphoses into numerical trends.
What's fascinating here is that we really have to unpack the philosophical weight of why statistical analysis is viewed as an apocalyptic threat in this framework.
Because to a modern ear, critiquing data collection sounds completely absurd.
We rely on it for literally everything.
We do. But you have to view it through Steiner's epistemological lens. To him, a religious conversion or a medical outcome, or even a tragedy like a suicide, is a deeply individual, profoundly karmic event.
It's the culmination of a unique human destiny stretching across incarnations.
Exactly. So when you reduce those unique destinies to mere data points, when you observe that 30% of a certain demographic experiences an awakening, or a specific percentage of a profession suffers from insanity, you are employing an intellectual approach that is entirely severed from the soul.
You are basically erasing the individual's karma and replacing it with a bell curve.
It is the ultimate expression of material collectivism for Steiner. That cold, detached numerical sorting of human experience fundamentally denies the spiritual individuality of the human being.
And he extends this critique to clinical medical trials as well, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He argues that statistically recording whether a medication worked across a broad population is entirely useless if the scientist does not deeply understand the individual karma and the spiritual constitution of the single patient.
He actually writes that when scientists publish theories of knowledge relying on this statistical approach, it's really as if Satan were loose.
Because statistics organize humanity into masses. They lump us into demographic groups based on data, and that plays directly into the broader apocalyptic prophecy Steiner outlines in the text.
Right. Satan is actively trying to organize humanity into smaller groups and larger groups.
Which Steiner aligns with the biblical terms Gog and Magog.
Gog and Magog. And the entire purpose of fracturing humanity into these groups is to expose massive populations to sweeping seduction by these Ahrimanic powers.
And the crazy part is, he mentions that humanity has actually been warned about this impending seduction before.
Yes. There is this fascinating, highly specific historical anecdote embedded in this lecture regarding a reincarnated whistleblower.
It's such a bizarre detail. Steiner claims that around the year 666 AD, there lived an individual in Rome who possessed clairvoyant abilities.
And this person spiritually perceived the early stages of this cosmic heist.
They saw the satanic preparation to bind human intellect happening way back then.
Fast forward centuries later, and according to Steiner, this exact same Roman individual reincarnated in Berlin during the first half of the 19th century.
He returned as an ordinary high school teacher named Trandorf.
Just a high school teacher in Berlin. And Trandorf actually attempted to sound the alarm, right?
He did. He wrote an aesthetic treatise. And even more directly, he wrote a book titled, Is the Devil a Figment of the Imagination?
He was out there advocating for the reality of this specific Ahrimanic threat.
But the institutional blindness of the era is really what Steiner focuses on here, because Trandorf was entirely ignored and actively opposed by the consistorial councils in Berlin.
The religious and educational authorities of the 19th century were just too captured by their own intellectual frameworks to recognize the warning of a reincarnated clairvoyant.
And the stakes of ignoring that warning are absolute. If this Ahrimanic power succeeds in fully binding human intellect, humanity is torn out of Earth's evolution.
Steiner warns that darkness would fall over all our previous incarnations, and a new, deeply corrupted planetary world evolution would begin.
So the obvious question is, what is the countermaneuver?
Right. How does humanity maintain its intellectual freedom without falling into this trap?
The alternative path relies on developing a true inner spiritual order through what Steiner calls the Michael power.
Referring to the Archangel Michael.
Exactly. And the goal here is not to abandon the intellect or revert to the Middle Ages. That's a key point.
We aren't supposed to go backward.
No. The goal is to keep our hard-won intellectual freedom, but consciously and willingly choose to use the Michael power to guide that independent intellect back to its divine origins.
We have to marry the cold intellect with deep spiritual truth.
Which brings us directly to the specific audience of this 1924 lecture.
Right. Steiner is speaking to a room full of priests. So how does a priest practically fight back against statistics, algorithmic groupthink, and an archai?
His answer is deeply mystical. It's the Eucharist, the ritual of transubstantiation.
He positions the priesthood as literally cosmic defenders.
He does. He instructs them that the act of transubstantiation is the method by which human beings can find the Father, the primal creative power of the universe, embedded directly in physical material.
And Christ, the Son, is the mediator who shows the way to the Spirit.
And he breaks down the spiritual mechanics of the ritual with just incredible specificity.
Yeah, he tells the priests that they must look at the physical bread and recognize that it conceals majestic cosmic beings. He lists the highest hierarchies of
The
angels.
seraphim, the cherubim, and the thrones.
In esoteric theology, just to clarify for everyone, the seraphim are spirits of love, the cherubim are spirits of harmony, and the thrones are spirits of will.
So Steiner is saying that the highest manifestations of divine will and wisdom are embedded in the densest physical matter, the bread.
When the priest performs the transubstantiation, the bread acquires a spiritual aura.
And the wine acts as a reinforcer for this aura.
When a participant experiences this, they are able to ascend and actually perceive the higher spiritual hierarchies. The angels, the archangels, and the archai who hold the Holy Spirit in their midst.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can really see how this serves as the ultimate antidote to the emancipated intellect we discussed earlier with William James and the statisticians.
Right, because modern data science looks at physical matter and human behavior and sees only dead data points.
It completely severs the physical from the spiritual.
But transubstantiation, at least in Steiner's framework, proves the absolute unity of the physical and the spiritual.
When the priest looks at the bread and perceives the cherubim, they are using their independent intellect, yes, but it is an intellect deeply married to profound spiritual reality.
They aren't rejecting thought, they're elevating it.
And Steiner ends the lecture with this incredibly cinematic, highly empowering instruction for these priests.
He tells them to imagine the Book of the Apocalypse placed directly underneath their chalice on the altar.
He places the burden of the prophecy entirely on their own will. He tells them that by taking the impulses of the apocalypse into their priestly work, by performing the ritual with intense spiritual order and true intellectual clarity, they become the heroes of the narrative.
They physically become the individuals prophesied in the book who will ward off the power of the beast, the false prophet, and Satan.
The chalice stands on the apocalyptic book, and their actual vocation is the execution of that prophecy.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? We've covered the consciousness soul age, the epistemological dangers of data collection, 19th century reincarnations, and angelic hierarchies residing in communion bread.
It is a lot to take in.
It is. Why should a 1924 esoteric lecture matter to a modern audience? Well, even if you strip away the cosmology of archai and seraphim, Steiner's underlying anxiety about the human condition is piercingly relevant right now.
I would argue it's more relevant now than it was in 1924.
Totally. This lecture serves as a desperate warning against the loss of individuality to mass groupthink. It highlights the profound coldness of reducing complex human experiences, our mental health, our societal traumas, our deepest moments of personal awakening to algorithmic data points.
In a contemporary world run by analytics, demographic groupings, and predictive algorithms, Steiner's critique of the emancipated intellect feels incredibly prescient.
It is a plea to remember the unique, unquantifiable human soul in an era entirely defined by information and statistics.
The battle for the independent intellect is essentially the modern battle for our attention and our spiritual individuality. And I want to leave you with one final thought pulled directly from the source text, something for you to consider long after this deep dive ends.
I love this part.
Early in the lecture, Steiner notes that in our current age, individuality is only just invading our minds and our souls. However, he prophesies that in a future era, a time he refers to as the Jupiter period, human corporeality, our very physical bodies, will be taken hold of by intellectuality.
Just process that for a second.
We have a conceptual understanding of an intellectual mind. But what does it mean for flesh, bone, and blood to be literally seized by intellect? I invite you to mull over what an intellectually possessed physical body might look like in human evolution. Will it manifest as technological integration or something entirely different?
It is a haunting question. Thank you for joining us as the third person at the table for this deep dive into the archives. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep looking for the individual soul behind the statistics, and we will catch you next time.